Everybody, welcome to our Data Architect demo session. Today, we're going to be focused on what we call Powered by Airbyte, which really under the hood is just everything Airbyte API. And so to introduce myself, for those who haven't met me, my name is Ryan Bernstein. I am one of the many solution engineers we have here at Airbyte. I also have Keith Maxwell with us today. He's going to be in the chat answering questions and helping you make sure that this time is valuable for you. One of the things we want to make sure is that when you walk away from the session today, that you feel comfortable with Airbyte and particularly how the Airbyte API can help you unlock some of your use cases. So it doesn't look like we have a huge group, which is great. So we really want to make this interactive. So feel free to post any questions you have. If you'll see in the bottom of your screen, you have a questions tab. If you want to put them there, that way Keith can get eyes on them. We can make sure we get you good answers. We're also happy to grab time after this session with you specifically to dig into the nuances of your use cases. So we'll put some links in the chat that you can use to grab that time. Just as a quick intros and getting started, Airbyte has a pretty globally diverse audience, so we always love to see where people are dialing in from. If you don't mind, just throw in the chat your name and where you're coming in from today. And as you do that, as I said, my name is Ryan Bernstein. I'm coming in from Nashville, Tennessee. Awesome. Keith is coming in from Long Island. Ilya, you're coming in from Russia. Great. Sina from Milan. Wonderful. Great to see that all. Again, feel free to use the chat, and also the questions tab to really make sure that the time is interactive today. So let's jump in. I'd like to start with just a quick overview of what we're going to be covering. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to focus on some of the use cases you have with Powered by Airbyte, or again, really the Airbyte API, and how it can help you unlock some of your data pipelines. I'm going to dig in specifically into the Powered by Airbyte experience, where you can use Airbyte behind the scenes to unlock value for your own companies and your own use cases, as well as talk about some of the things that are coming down the road. But before I get to any of that, I think it's helpful to set the stage on what Airbyte actually is and what we do. So for those who aren't familiar, we are what we call an ELT company, although I like to say that it's a small t, really on the E and the L. Our goal is to help you with your data movement. Wherever you have data, we want to get it to wherever you need it. And particularly with a focus on the long tail of connectors. These are ones that you won't typically find as out-of-the-box solutions in most of your data movement tools that are out there. Maybe these are internal APIs, maybe these are just smaller, newer partners, but we wanted to build the tooling that makes it really easy for you to build new connectors, maintain them as they grow, and really creates this huge catalog of high-quality connectors. So Airbyte is first and foremost an open source company. If you haven't yet, you can do a homebrew deploy of Airbyte, or you can just do a Docker compose on your local. The idea is we want Airbyte to be accessible to everybody. And part of that is that we're really transparent in how we work. So you'll see today that we have access to a lot of our the logging and the various nuance of how Airbyte is architected. That's how we want you to be able to see and interact with Airbyte. And as an aside, I'm going to be using our cloud today, but everything that I'm doing is applicable to both the standard open source deployments, the self-managed enterprise deployments, as well as our cloud deployments. When you're using cloud and you're using a Powered by Airbyte experience, all of your usage is simply applied to our fair, what we call our usage-based pricing model, which simply means we're charging you for the amount of data you push through Airbyte, either rows for APIs or gigabytes for files and database sources. That said, jumping to the API for a second, Airbyte's API can unlock some really powerful use cases with how your data moves. Most commonly, we actually see this in data orchestration. So we can click into these, for example, we'll jump in and out. But a lot of our users use tools like Airflow, maybe Dagster, Perfect, to actually control their pipelines. Airbyte offers some out-of-the-box orchestration. It's rather simple, like a cron or kickoff every hour, a couple hours. But if you want to get to the more sophisticated approach pipelines, then we generally encourage using a orchestrator like Airflow. And what they will do, and the Airflow operator here takes advantage of the APIs that we're going to focus on to manage all of your pipelines. They will kick off jobs, they will get statuses, and they can use that to really help hone in and optimize your overall data flows. And so here's just an example. So like that's the Airflow page. Again, we have similar to those for Prefect and Dagster, among many others. And it just uses the trigger sync endpoint of our API. And that really is the core of how that functions. So we'll dig into that one today. Same thing goes for observability. As a general theme with Airbyte, we hyper-focused on what we call the E and the L, the extract and the load, and decided not to reinvent the wheel on some great tooling that has already been out there, such as the orchestration as well as observability. And so by exposing these API endpoints, we allowed for other partners, say like the Monte Carlos, Anomalos, or many others out there who have great observability platforms to help get some insights into your Airbyte pipelines so you as a user can take advantage of their tooling. So, and an example of that is you can get a job status and details and understand how much data was moved, the time involved, and so forth. So those are two common use cases of how Airbyte's APIs can be leveraged by our users. But what I'm going to focus on again today is what we call our Powered by Airbyte experience. So let me actually pull this up here. If you haven't seen this page, I'm going to drop it here in the chat. It's definitely worth checking out. It shares a lot of like what the vision, the vision of Powered by Airbyte is. Generally speaking, when someone comes into Airbyte, you will see that you can set up a source, set up a destination, create these connections to start moving data. But oftentimes, if you're building another product or tooling that requires data, you don't want to have to recreate the wheel there on the E and the L piece. And so that's where Powered by Airbyte comes in. We allow you to not have to worry about that. Airbyte will take care of the data movement piece. You then can build your tooling, say an analytics dashboard or maybe an e-commerce enhancement, all with not having to worry about the data movement. So today, I'm going to focus on what we call the headless version. This is where Airbyte is operated purely by the API behind the scenes. Your users would have no idea that they're using Airbyte, and they don't need to know. Alternatively, we are working on what we call a UI version, or if you've seen things like connector cards, that's more similar to what we're looking at there. In this case, we would actually bring both the front end and back end to you, so you won't even have to worry about the front end. Today, you would need to take care of the front end piece. You're going to have to control how those API calls are sent to Airbyte and how all that is managed. But for most of our use cases, it'll allow you to unlock the power of Airbyte, again, without your users really being wary to it. So jumping back in here, I'm going to kick off here in a second, and I'm actually going to jump around for 1 second. The things I want to focus on today is showing you how we can create a destination, create a source, and turn those two things into what we call a connection, triggering a sync, and checking on that status. If these things are a little unfamiliar with you, I would recommend attending one of our other demos where we show the basics of Airbyte, what it looks like to set up all of these connectors and these pipelines. So we're not going to spend too much time on that today. I'm just going to work from the assumption you have a familiarity with what those are. But Chris or Keith can post a link in the chat to one of our other demo sessions where you can come in and join us and learn a little bit more about what it means to set those up. All right. So jumping back, first thing to get started, and I would encourage I go along to you follow along with me, is to actually make some of these requests yourself. And so if you haven't yet, what we are going to need is to have you generate an API token. So let's click in here. This will take us to the developer portal. There is also a link to this from our API docs. I can show you that. Let me see if I can log in. Great, I am logged in. And you'll see that I have several keys here, many that were created as I lost my previous key. One thing to keep in mind, once you create a new API key over here, you get one chance to save it, store it, put it in your password manager, wherever you keep your secrets safe. You won't be able to retrieve that again. And so do learn from me here and don't lose your keys. All right, that said, let's jump back into our API docs. I will put a link to this here in the chat. All right. All right, Hans, welcome and thank you for joining us. So our API docs are phenomenal docs for getting started and getting familiar with the syntax and the nuances of our APIs. So I'm going to jump into Postman here for a good chunk of this demo, but I actually strongly encourage anybody who's getting started with the Airbyte API to start in our docs. And so let me show you an example. The first thing we're going to do is create a destination. And that's just going to be a post request to our API. But there's a lot of nuance in getting that destination formatting right. And that's because when you set up a Snowflake destination, it's going to be different than setting up a Redshift destination or maybe a BigQuery destination. You have to have all the right configurations in a particular format for Airbyte to be able to accept that request for you. And so if you actually see here, let's take a look. We can look at Snowflake. We can find it. Here we go. Here's destination Snowflake. Our doc's gonna tell you everything you need to correctly set up Snowflake. You can actually go ahead and type all of that in here. So I can just put in, example, and we'll fill out a particular request for you. You can pick the format of how you want to see that. And you can actually go ahead and initiate that request in our docs to get the proper response. Again, as you're building out for the first time, I think this can be super helpful just to help get through some of the hurdles of getting that syntax right, particularly when it comes to creating connectors, because that is very individualized to each of the connector that you're creating. So the other piece too is, I'll jump up here, you'll want to put that token we created up in here. That will allow you to auth in. So that said, let me jump over to Postman here. Before I do, let's take a quick pause. We're about a third of the way into this. Let's see if there's any questions that we need to deal with. Arslan, great question. So one of the things that you're calling out there is that when you create a destination or a source with Airbyte, we don't validate it. This is a bit of a different behavior. So let me actually come into my workspace for a second. So this is the workspace that I'll be demoing today. When I were to say create a Snowflake connector here, we actually run a suite of tests to make sure that the creds are okay, that everything is acceptable. So for example, if I have an expired password, we would surface an error here in the UI and say, we actually need you to fix that password. When you are making API requests, we don't run those same validations. This is for a couple different reasons. I'm not going to get too much into today, but the feedback, knowing that that is frustrating for you, is helpful for us. So, but that is a good call out to know that as we'll make these requests today, we will accept it and just kind of take on good faith that the creds you're using are good. So let's go ahead. Let me actually jump into that to Postman. All right, so I have my Postman collection here. This has a series of commands that we're going to be running today. Happy to share these, but again, these are just coming from that same set of docs that I shared with you. So if you want to use those docs, that will help you configure the right commands here. So in this first one, I'm going to call the V1 destinations. Let me jump back out real quick. This is the same endpoint here that I was referencing, and we're just going to create a Snowflake destination connector. So if we take a look here, let's come into our destinations. This is a brand new workspace. You don't see any connectors. So if this works, let's go ahead. I'm going to check my workspace ID. I think that looks right. That matches the workspace I have here. One thing to note, I already created a workspace for this. You can also create workspaces via the API if you so choose. I already had one that's established. So I'm just going to use that and skip the create workspace step. All right, let's go ahead and hit send request. All right, so we sent that off. It looks like we got a 200 back. It's great. What it did was now create that Snowflake destination connector for us. It also assigns a destination ID. We're going to need that here in a second, so we're going to come back to that. But just keep in mind that that's something you want to keep track of. It has the name that we assigned as well as the various creds that I put into it. If we jump back into the UI, let's see if we refresh real quick, we should see that we now have a Snowflake destination connector. And there's a little bit of a lag. There we go. And so we can see it. And this is everything that I put into it, which is just wonderful. Fantastic. If I needed to make a change to this connector, you most certainly can. So you just see the update destination. You make a patch request to that. You provide that destination ID I referenced. So I showed this ID earlier. You want to pull that ID. You put that into your request, and you can say, change maybe the start date or change the particular warehouse we're using to push that data through, depending on the nature of the change you're doing. So, but we're good on the destination side. Let's go ahead and now create a source. So same concept with creating sources. It can be very nuanced, and you have behavior that's specific to each sources. APIs can be different than databases. Postgres is going to be slightly different than MySQL, and so forth. So we can use our docs. That will really help walk you through getting that format right for the first time. Let's just go ahead and send this. I'm going to create a Postgres source here in this case. Let's see if that worked. It did. And check, I think that's the right workspace ID. So everything here looks good. Let's jump into my workspace and see if it actually created the source. All right. So we don't. Let's refresh real quick. I'm getting a little bit of a lag. There we go. All right. So now we have our Postgres source. Fantastic. Everything there looks great. When it comes to creating sources and destinations, it's effectively the same concept. Airbyte uses the concept of using them both as connectors. And so as they're established, the calls between them, you'll notice, are very, very similar. So just like with the destination, one of the things we're going to want to look out for is this source ID. We're going to need that here in a second. So let me actually grab the source ID. I'm going to copy this over real quick. So now that we have a source and a destination connector both set up, we actually want to link the two. We call this a connection. All that means is we're going to take the data from that source and push it to that destination. So Airbyte can have any combination of sources and destinations. You can have one source going to many destinations, or many sources going to one destination. So let's go ahead and grab that source. We're going to use a post to create connections. I guess before I copy it over, let's just jump into the docs real quick and take a look at the create connection. In the create connection post, this is going to be a little bit more uniform in what you actually need to do, but there is some nuance in getting this right. Airbyte particularly need to know some configuration details about how you want this data to replicate. For example, we talk out here about which sync mode you want to use, what orchestration you want to use. If you want to set it to manual and let Airflow run it, that's great. Or if you want to use Airbyte's internal orchestrator or use like a cron, you most certainly have those capabilities, but you need to define those in the request itself. And you can see an example here of what some of those defaults could look like. So let's go ahead here. I've done that in this case. So I'm going to pick incremental deduped plus history. That's our most common sync mode. For scheduling type, I'm going to use manual. That means I'm just going to trigger this connection outside of Airbyte. Again, commonly using something like, say, Airflow. Pick some other configurations here, such as data residency and other components. But what I do need to do is update the source ID and destination ID. So let's come in here. Let's grab this response. And we'll just copy these over. That worked. All right. Create destination. Same thing. Let's grab that destination ID. And fantastic. Cool. All right, everything there looks good. And let's go ahead and hit send and see what we see. This one can take a little bit longer just because there's more happening behind the scenes. So you just have to be a little bit more patient with this particular request. As that's running, let me take a look at the chat and see if we have any particular questions. Nothing that I see. Looks like Keith is there. Great. Awesome. All right, so we got a 200 back. Took 15 seconds, not too unexpected. And everything here is looking pretty good. So if we come back into our workspace, if all is well, we should now see that we have a connection. So this is great. We now have our Postgres to Snowflake connection. One thing you'll see is the sync has not been started yet, and that's because our frequency was set to manual. It's waiting for us to actually trigger and run this particular sync. So this is probably where you're going to spend a lot of time with the API. Again, I spoke earlier to how Airflow or other tools can build that orchestration for Airbyte. You most certainly can. You can also build it out yourself. If you wanted to just control Airbyte programmatically, you most certainly could do that. So let's show an example of what that looks like. If we jump into Postman, we're going to use the trigger sync endpoint or the V1 jobs. Let me jump back into the docs for a second. So this is the one that I'm looking at specifically here. You'll see what I'm going to look for here is a particular connection ID. So that's what's required. And then it's going to tell us what do we actually want to do with this. Do we want to do a sync or do we want to do a reset of that particular connection? A reset, keep in mind, generally will wipe all that data that's associated. So be very careful and make sure that you get that behavior right. So let's go ahead. I'm going to come back to our connection we created. Let's grab this connection ID. And let's bring it over here. And we're just going to replace what I have. Great. Job type is sync. Again, that's what we want to see. Let's go ahead and kick this off. Fantastic. Another 200. This one took a a lot less time, and everything actually looks good. So the job should be running. Airbyte jobs generally on the low end take several minutes to go, so we can actually jump into Airbyte. Let's take a look at this, and let's see. We actually see a sync running. But again, let's assume we want to check this programmatically. And so let's actually jump back into Postman. We're going to call a different endpoint to get the actual status for that particular job. So in this case, we have the job ID. So we're going to call the V1 jobs endpoint where you provide a particular job ID. So I'm going to copy this one in here. Let's do that and hit send. And what we get back very quickly is that we get, for that particular job ID, we get a status. We tell you what time it was started at, if any data has been synced yet. So let me actually show you a little bit. We can come here. So this is called the Get Job Status and Details page. And I'll just share some information about what's going on. One thing you'll see here is we can continuously, let's go ahead and ping that again. You can see still we have our start time. We have the fact that it's still running, and we haven't actually synced any bytes or synced any rows yet. So you can build some logic in to continuously ping. Airbyte doesn't have a push notification system yet. That is something that has been widely requested, and I think it will come at some point. But today, you do still need to just continue to ping this endpoint, and you'll get a status for where your particular job is. Once it hits the completed state, we'll get some data here around how much data was processed and ran with this particular job. And so we can continue, keep checking on it. And there we go. We see that. So we went from running to succeeded, which is great. We will tell you the last time that it has that update at, as well as how much data was particularly synced. So in this case, not very much. We had 96 rows and, just looks like a few kilobytes there. But this is great if you want to start understanding the amount of data Airbyte was processed or get that status for that particular job. If we jump back into the UI, let's take a look at this connection. And the same thing we see here. So yeah, 30 kilobytes, 96 records, and it took a little over a minute and a half. So overall, I think that is looking pretty good. I would encourage doing some of the same testing that we've done here. So if you want to get access to these calls and queries, you can get them, again, back in the docs here at api.airbyte.com. That will help you structure all of those queries, get some of those up and running. Postman is a fantastic tool for actually just quickly testing and iterating. I assume most of you are familiar with Postman, but if you're not and you're exploring Airbyte's API, you should definitely spend some time there. I'm going to step back for a second. Let's see if we have any questions in the chat that we want to deal with. Let's take a look. Feedback on the callback. Absolutely hear you. Great feedback for us. And that's something I think we want to get to as well. So today, Airbyte doesn't have that great async mentality where you need to continue pinging the get status. We won't necessarily send a call back once that job is done. Krishna asking about how does it work with large amounts of data and pagination? So I think one thing to keep in mind, and the focus with today is about the Airbyte API and how it will manage your pipelines for you. Less so when it comes to like the specifics of the connection. I think, Krishna, that's where maybe the core of your question is at, is how does Airbyte handle trying to replicate 2 terabytes, 3 terabytes, and so forth, or if you have an API that has hundreds, if not thousands of pages. Airbyte can support all of those use cases. We can do terabyte level replications, and we can work with APIs that have near unlimited pagination built in. We have some great materials broadly for Airbyte at docs.airbyte.com. It will walk you through all of the nuance of how Airbyte is architected, how our framework works, how we handle very large jobs like terabyte replications or those APIs. And so I would encourage, if you haven't, spend some time reading through our docs. It will, I think, answer most of those questions you have. But just to give you like a very quick summary, for databases, we chunk things. We pull things, call it like in 10,000 rows, and we process each one of those one at a time. For APIs, we have pagination behavior built into all of our APIs that we pull data from. And so we have various constructs for those, whether you're using cursor-based pagination or offset and so forth. But Airbyte has all of that accounted for and is really built, that's like the value built into the platform that you'll see. Great. Hans, good question about authenticating into our connectors. So one of the things you saw here, you might not have seen, is let's actually I'm going to pull up Google Ads as a quick example. So something that is worth calling out that's a little bit nuanced is in cloud, most of our users are going to use our OAuth app. So Airbyte has built this out. You don't have to worry about it. We provide it as a convenience for most of our users who don't want to deal with having to build out an OAuth app, getting it approved, and going through all of that process. And so you can just come in, hit sign in with Google, you can start pulling your data and being off to the races. That said, in many of our Powered by Airbyte engagements, that actually isn't desirable. Many of our users want their own OAuth app. They don't want Airbyte to manage the creds or be part of that kind of man in the middle, which we absolutely get. And so, let's see if I can find it in here. Here we go. We have some docs that talk about creating OAuth-based sources. So you can override our behavior, bring in your own OAuth app, and you can manage that relationship. Again, we see this most commonly with our Powered by Airbyte users who are using our cloud product. If you're using open source, and maybe Hans, what you saw, let me see. I don't know if I have my open source deployment running. I do, which is great. You'll notice that if we pull up Google Ads here, we don't offer our OAuth apps in open source. This requires you actually going out and building that out. It's specific to each connector and how you do that. Salesforce only takes a matter of a few minutes. Setting up a Google one can be a little bit more involved, but it's just very situational. I hope that answers your question. If not, you'll certainly let us know. Great question about custom sources and destinations. And as Keith said, those are supported. I will say those are newly supported. That wasn't a feature we had originally, but if we come out to, let's see, create a source, I scroll down here, scroll up, you'll notice here that we have custom connectors. So this is something we added, I think it's maybe several weeks or months ago now at this point, but was one of the hotly requested features from our community. Airbyte strongly focuses on helping users build out what we call custom connectors. Jumping into our workspace, you can see our builder here. This is designed to help you build out custom connectors. We have our SDK or CDK to build out those as well. And you can manage all of those with the Airbyte API now as well. So great. Let's see. Got it, Hans. I think the question about Google Ads and getting the developer token is more about particularly the nuance of setting up that specific connection, less so about the Airbyte API. That said, since we're kind of running out of time right now, if you want to reach out to Keith or I, happy to dig into that with you and hear a little bit more about the challenges you're having with getting developer tokens. So in some cases, we might be able to help there. In other cases, that might be just a more of a partner relationship thing. Either way, happy to collaborate and work with you on that if you want to reach out and grab time with us. Let's take a look. All right. While I do that, we're going to send out this deck after. So don't worry about all of these links or all of these materials. You'll get this. We'll send this out to you. But I do have a lot of things here that are worth just being aware of. So we have the docs that we talked through today, the api.airbyte.com. We have also some of those SDKs I mentioned for creating those custom connectors and really unlocking the long tail of connectors. The developer portal for getting your tokens, and feel free to use that, no problem. As well as if you want early access to Powered by Airbyte, there's a form you want to fill out, put it in there. That's creating a wait list for us so we know who we want to reach out to help be part of that beta release and development partner. So please, if you're interested, fill out there. Otherwise, since we're coming up on time here, you can reach out to Keith or I, use the link that you see here, the Calendly link or that QR code, and you can grab time with us and we'll dig into the specifics of your use case. Also, feel free, we have a great Slack community. So please post in our Slack community or in our GitHub discussions. Happy to answer any questions you see there. But really appreciate all of you taking the time today. Thank you for learning a little bit more about Airbyte and look forward to engaging with you here in the future. Thank you, everybody.